there's a lot of tools out there for health that we don't realize can help support us on our health journeys. We just haven't been exposed to them. And so that's my job here, is to be an investigator, to ask the questions, to get some answers so that each and every one of us can build the health and the vibrancy that we all deserve.
Good morning and welcome to the Fusionary Health Podcast. I'm Dr. Shivani Gupta, and this is the podcast dedicating to recalibrating your health every day. My goal is to help you wake up each day energized by addressing root causes and giving you new approaches to preventive health. The more we know about integrative health, the more empowered we are in building the vibrant health we want.
Hello and welcome to the Fusionary Health Podcast. It's your host, Dr. Shivani Gupta, and today marks a really special occasion. This is the 100th episode of the Fusionary Health Podcast. I have now done this 100 times, and that to me is pretty insane. It takes a lot of consistency and it takes a lot of people to get this podcast out into the world. When I kicked this podcast off almost 2 years ago, did not know that it would evolve into something so beautiful and so great, with so many great listeners who come up to me and tell me that they're listening to all the episodes. So thank you to each of you who is a listener, who loves this podcast, who shares it with others, and tells me about it, because it keeps me fueled and it keeps me going. And so today I have a very special episode in stock for you. I am going to share my top 10 favorite episodes. Now know this. That was really hard to do. Out of 100, only 10%, especially because a lot of these podcast guests are people I know personally. So this is not a reflection of my favorite people. This is not even a reflection of my favorite topics. I just had to sit and think, out of all the guests, what are the top ones that come up for me where they said something that really moved the needle for me? And I was like, I'm going to change that. That is a mic drop moment that's worth a pound of gold. I need to listen to that one. And so I hope you enjoy this episode today. Know that before every single episode I record here, I always say a prayer and hope that this podcast and this message reaches one person whose life it's meant to change. And this podcast, now that we're 100 episodes in, even my team and I were like, whoa, we can't believe we made it to 100 episodes. I think there's some crazy statistic where the majority of podcasts don't make it to 100. So pat on the back, moment of celebration. And the biggest thing is this podcast has delivered so much value to myself, to all of you, to so many different people who I'm sure I haven't met and might not get to physically meet in this life. And when I was going back through the episodes to listen to my top 10, to be able to summarize them, I was like, holy shit, this is insane. If you listen to all 100 episodes, this is like paying for a 100-hour course in health and wellness and functional medicine and integrative medicine. It's insane, literally. And I'm not saying that because it's my podcast. I'm saying that because I have gone back and listened to these episodes and thought every day I should just start from one and listen to them again, because I'm now I'm not even rehearing, I'm hearing things that I didn't hear when I was interviewing. Sometimes when I'm interviewing the guest, and you can probably tell this if you watch this podcast on YouTube, every podcast is on YouTube, my face is like absorbing what they're saying, but I also have to think of my next best question. I can't just sit there and absorb and chill and then make up my next question. So it's interesting because when I go back and listen, I'm like, dang, that was a masterclass on gut. That was a masterclass on brain. That was a masterclass on Alzheimer's. And it goes on and on. These are truly some of the best in the health and wellness space right now. And it's such an honor to have them on my podcast talking to me. If you know me well and you saw some of these YouTubes, you can see I'm just sitting there astounded that I get to talk to this person who I've revered for decades. And so two of them made it into the top 10 just because they were so impactful. It's interesting if you read someone's book, you follow their work, you know everything they teach, and then they get to talk to you live and you're like, gosh, I get so excited. Okay, so welcome to the 100th episode of this podcast. I am so proud of this podcast. It really started as a dream to highlight the fusionary practitioners, all these incredible doctors and practitioners that I have gotten to meet. And as I met them over the last decade, every time I stopped in to have a cup of coffee, in my case, tea, or lunch with them, I would learn so much. Their patient stories, their examples, the work they did. And I thought, God, how come I am the only one who gets to hear these stories? That's insane. Everyone should get to hear this. Like, if everyone understood the diversity of healing that's available to us for all the different issues we have, we wouldn't suffer the way we do. That was the premise of this podcast. And so the first 50 practitioners or 50 people on the podcast pretty much were all local. They're people who I already knew, who I was like, someone has to hear about Dr. Stephen James, about Dr. Branson Collins, about Dr. Kim Marone. Like, all these people are my practitioners. I go to them. I ask them questions. Dr. Amy Hornemann now, later on. So it's like, I just wanted to share that incredible toolkit, database, and dream team with all of you. And then when I got through all the cool people I know, I was like, oh, now I meet people at conferences all over the country, and I get to ask them to be on the podcast, and I get to share their wisdom and their topics with all of you. And so this podcast, know this, no one gets on the podcast unless I choose them. I have to I do a vibe check. I meet them at conferences and I'm like, please come onto my podcast. That's how you become a podcast guest on this podcast. Sometimes now someone has me on some email list where I do get pitched for all sorts of great guests. The only one I've taken that way is Erasmus, because I was like, what? I get to meet the founder of the biggest oil movement and company? Of course, I'll say yes to that. But other than that, I say no to everybody, because unless you vibe with me and what I'm trying to share with the world, I am not sharing your content on my platform, just not doing it. And so just know there's a big gatekeeper between what you get to hear on this podcast, because I have to be into it too. I have to learn from it. I have to feel like, gosh, this is powerful stuff. I want people to know about this because this might be the toolkit for them or their family member or their loved one or someone who needs to hear this wisdom. And so that's the ethos of the podcast. So now I go to probably 8 to 10 amazing health conferences a year. And I basically stock all the cool people who I want on this podcast. And then you get to learn from them alongside of me. So that's the ethos on the podcast right now at episode 100. So let's dive in to my top 10 favorite episodes from the Fusionary Health Podcast. Number 1, Krishnan, the founder of Microbiome Labs, the creator of Megasporebiotic. Hundreds of thousands of people have taken that probiotic. I take it, my kids take it, all my friends take it, my family. When the pandemic started, I just ordered cases of it. And I was like, I'm just going to save everyone's life with this probiotic, vitamin D, and my turmeric. Done. That was my plan. And it pretty much worked, actually. I kept a lot of people healthy and safe with my little plan of action of protection. So yes, Kiran was a fantastic episode. I just refreshed myself on it today. He gave a profound masterclass on leaky gut and the importance of understanding our gut microbiome, understanding what's going on in there, understanding that the majority of us suffer with leaky gut, which just means that we have a gut permeability that is not serving us and it's leaving us chronically inflamed. And so gut health, inflammation are big topics to me, big topics of importance. And Kiran is incredible at teaching that topic, breaking it down, giving us metaphors, helping us understand it, and explaining the importance of really building that diversity of gut microbiome. And in that episode, it was episode number 35, he shared at the end of it this mic drop moment that was it was so powerful for me. He said, we are microbial beings living in an antimicrobial world. And when he said that, that completely winded me, because it was like, boom, do you realize you are made up of your gut microbiome? Your gut microbiome completely outnumbers you. And this thing inside of us, we're supposed to protect it, honor it, revere it, maintain a great balance. What are we doing? We're eating processed trash. We're eating chemicals. We're allowing a lot of chemicals in. The toxic burden we have is significant. We're experiencing a lot of stressors. We're just damaging it. And then on top of it, we're surrounded by antibacterial soap, antibacterial hand sanitizers, and cleaners. And so ever since then, when I go to my office and I wash my hands, I'm always like, what's in this soap? What's in this soap? Anywhere I go now, I'm like, I'm a microbial being in an antimicrobial world. And whatever this is probably killing my gut microbiome. And I can't think about it too much because I get a little crazy on that topic, but it's something I think about now. And so I would never buy like antibacterial hand sanitizer. I get it. Sometimes we need the antibacterial stuff. But where can we make conscious small changes that are better? I'll give you an example. In my car, I have Clorox wipes. I've always had paper towels, Clorox wipes. I have kids. I never know what's going to happen with those kids. Now they're older, so it's not as much of an issue. But I thought to myself, when I go and get gas, I'm always like, ew, I need to wash my hands after. And I thought you could go to Whole Foods and buy the like EO hand sanitizer with essential oils that you know is as effective and use that instead. So to me, that episode really illustrated if we want to have a healthy microbiome in this antimicrobial world, which basically means we are humans in an anti-human world, then we have to make different choices consciously, consistently, or the end result will be definitive gut microbiome damage all the time. That's systemic inflammation and that's disease and death. That's how I took that episode. So I'm kicking it off as my number one favorite episode. Also, Krishnan is my mentor, and he helped take my supplement company from dying a sad death to completely turned around and on the best momentum path of success. So he's one of my favorite humans on earth as well. So of course I'm partial, but he was one of my favorite episodes because I am obsessed with gut health. And I thought that statement was just so powerful. If you just let that absorb for a minute, dang, make different choices. They all add up. Okay. Episode number 2. And I'm not going to do the rest of these in any given order because that's like hard to do. But another favorite episode of mine is episode number 50 with Robbie Bessner. So Robbie Bessner is the founder of Therasage. I have met him at so many different conferences. He's at every conference I go to, I think. His company Therasage has a lot of really cool tools when it comes to detoxing. In Ayurveda, we teach that detoxing is one of the most important tools we have in our toolkit to reverse all the levels of oxidative stress and toxic burden that the body holds on to. And so we must detox on a daily, quarterly, and annual basis. It's key. It's mandatory. And here in the West, we are never taught these types of ideas, which is kind of ridiculous. So Robbie, he had his own health journey because his child contracted chronic Lyme disease. And so he shared that he went on the search to find the right tools to help her detox and heal. And back then we didn't have virtual practices, functional medicine practices, all the stuff that we have now. And so on his journey, he learned about red light therapy and how when we use red light as a therapy for detoxing, we have near and far infrared rays. He talked about how that penetration goes up to 3 inches deep into the body. And the 70% of our fat cells, which is water, comes into bioresonance. And the toxins and the cell separate without harm to the cell and can then be flushed out of the body. And so using red light therapy is a very powerful tool. And so he went out creating a mat, his own special infrared sauna. He went to China and studied for 3 months, looking for the best creators, suppliers of this. And once he made it for his own child, doctors were interested who were treating for these issues because they were like, wow, you made something that really works. How are you getting these results? And so I love that. I love when someone goes out there to solve a problem, ends up building the best thing they can because it's for themselves, their own family, their own loved one. And thus, now we all get to use it. And so I have met him and his wife many times. They're very beloved in this integrative medicine, functional medicine, and biohacking space. And so at one event, I bought his PEMF mat, and that's in my business office in my chair. So every day when I get to work, I just plug that thing in and I set it to PEMF level 4, which is for calming and grounding, which is something I always want in my daily life, especially at work. And then I put infrared on with the red light. And I'm like, oh, cool. I'm getting infrared, getting warmed up, and I'm getting this PEMF benefit. And so that was my first purchase. And I was like, wow, this is a high quality product. Looks like it's going to last me forever. I should buy one for my home office. So I'll probably do that this year at one of his events when I see him. And I contacted them later and I said, hey, on your website, I see these 10 other things and I want all of them. And so Robbie called me back. We chatted. And I said, look, I'm a big believer in detoxing. And I know I do it from an Ayurvedic perspective, but sometimes if we're not bringing in the tools, we're not fully supporting ourselves to keep up with the toxic burden we're experiencing. And so on the podcast, if you listen, he explained the benefits of the infrared sauna he created where your head stays out of the sauna. And he made a powerful argument for why our head should stay out of our sauna. First of all, many of us have fillings, like myself. And so we don't want to heat the head way too much because of that issue. Like the toxins and mercury inside of our fillings could be released. Part one. Part two, if you want to do an infrared sauna and you get in there, oftentimes the temperature of your brain and the temperature of your head will stop your core temperature rising because the brain will only allow you to heat the head up to a certain amount. And after that, it's like a safety switch that gets flipped off and you won't heat up anymore. But the body can take more than the head. And so if you leave the head out of the sauna, then we're creating even more detox opportunities for the body. And I actually have found that to be true. So I bought the sauna. It's in my home office in the corner. And I just get in it at night, every other night, sometimes 20 minutes, sometimes 35 minutes. If I do 35 minutes, I like to set up my laptop in front of me and set up some course that I've signed up for to learn more. If it's 20, I'm just on my iPhone and scrolling is the truth of it. Or if I was good, I'd read books. But it's nice because your hands can come out of it. You have these little pockets that are right on it to hold your phone while you're in there. And you're just sitting there and sweating in this box, but your head, and for the women out there, our hair is not affected. So huge selling point. And as an Ayurvedic practitioner who's a huge believer in the importance of consistent detoxing in the modern day world, that tool to me was my investment in my longevity, my investment in all aspects of my health. Also, bonus, increases metabolism. Sweat, and it's like a workout, burn of calories. I'm like, yes, I'll take that too for my non-workout days. And so those are all the reasons I loved having Robbie on the podcast. I learned so much from him in that episode. And vibe check, I've loved his vibe ever since I met him. He feels like the most loving dad, father figure of your whole life. He's just so peaceful and calm in his energy center. And so when I invest in tools and things, I'm very much also seeing, am I in resonance with that person? And so to have him on the podcast was an honor. To meet someone who's creating so many cool tools is really an honor. And I just loved having Robbie on the podcast. So he's my number 2, episode 50. If you want to go check out that episode, that one went a little long because he's just that awesome. And we had that many things to talk about. And it was truly a masterclass in infrared light, red light, all those things. So if you're interested in that, definitely check out that episode. Number 3. Dr. Amy Hornemann. So Amy Hornemann came onto my podcast. I just met her in the last year in person. I didn't know she knows my entire network of people. Amy Hornemann is so smart, so beautiful, and boy, does she know her thing when it comes to thyroid. She knows her topic inside and out. She was a great guest on the podcast. She talked and explained about thyroid health, what happens over time, how women need more support, how we're told a lot of ideas around you can heal everything naturally, which can take forever. And in the meantime, why don't you just get the support you need? She talked about how when we go to primary care, we're getting really basic answers and really basic support, and we need so much more. And I'm very passionate about thyroid health because I have gotten help. Thank God. The functional medicine practitioner I met 14 years ago now changed my life. Her name's Dr. Richa from Houston, who put me on a medication, was like, just so you know, you're going to need this. You need this now and just keep it on. But Dr. Amy was so wonderful. She really talked about thyroid health, thyroid approaches, how she supports women with T3. Just stop thinking of it as a medication. It's hormone replacement therapy. We know as we go into perimenopause and menopause, many of us in perimenopause, our progesterone will tank, our testosterone will tank. We're going to need those hormone replacement therapies. Obviously, not everyone is into HRT. I'm super into it right now because I've seen a huge difference. So after Dr. Amy was on my podcast, I hired her. I was a couple months in, I was trying to do it all on my own. And I thought to myself, I said, you know what? I am doing great. And after 2, I'm so tired. And then by evening, like I eat dinner and I'm done. I have no energy left. And so I called her up. I was like, I am so tired after dinner. I'm not even a nice person anymore. You don't want to know me. I basically want to tell my family, can I go now? And you just manage yourselves and you all put yourselves to bed. So she sat me down. She goes, I got you, girl. And so I hired her. I worked with her team. We did the big blood work. I got a big old lecture about what I needed to change. I did it. And I can tell you, quality of life, big difference. It's different than functional medicine. To optimize for thyroid health is to optimize for energy and for your brain. And those are the deliverables I wanted. And those are the deliverables I got. And so I highly recommend working with her. If you are a busy mom, woman, business owner, anything, and you just want great energy, hormone health is the where we're going to get that energy. And of course, I believe in all the natural tools as well. But boy, has she got me on a plan, and I'm loving the results. So that is episode number 3. And I love how she broke down thyroid health. I think she's a great speaker on this topic, and I've seen that as well. And she was episode number 68. Now, my next favorite episode, Heather Sandison. She's episode number 63 on my podcast. I met Heather Sandison at A4M Vegas. I think it was the year that I spoke at that cool conference. I met her through Robert Love, who's also been on this podcast. And Robert Love was like, I'm making videos with Heather. Do you want to come? I was like, of course, Robert, sure. She speaks on Alzheimer's, and she had an Alzheimer's summit coming up. She invited me to be on it. Heather Sandison on this episode of the podcast goes into dementia, neurogenesis, how our opinions around amyloid plaques and tau proteins, and simplifying what it'll take to reverse Alzheimer's dementia was completely wrong. Billions of dollars and so much time and effort has gone into Alzheimer's research, and it was all pretty much a waste. And so what we're talking about now in that space is, yeah, it's a complex multi-system approach to Alzheimer's, but she has a physical clinic, a place, residential facility where people can send their family members who have Alzheimer's. She can put them on her protocol with her team, and they have seen the results of Alzheimer's. And so I really loved meeting her, hearing about her 6-pillar plan, how she approaches it, how she looks at it from a multi-directional approach, what her findings have been. I know someone close to me who I've known for many years was diagnosed with Alzheimer's a few years ago, and it was so shocking to me that I was like, wait a minute, how this is a horrible disease that while you're alive and you're well and fine, you just forget everyone around you. How can that happen? And Parkinson's runs in my family. It happened to my grandfather. Now it's happening to my uncle. Had my father been alive, I think it would have potentially been there for him. But knowing him, he was the first original biohacker. So I think he would have fought it and been able to reverse it with the types of things Heather talks about. So Heather was beautiful at explaining Alzheimer's, the causes, the treatment plans, the tools we can use, ketosis and different lifestyle tools, and focusing on sleep. So I really loved her episode because everything she taught about prevention for Alzheimer's also applies to pretty much every chronic metabolic disease. So it was a great masterclass in overall health. Brain health to me, it happens to be a private obsession. And so she made it into my top 10 that I remembered as like, hey, that was a wonderful episode. Very, very well done. Next, number 5, Jack Del Accio. 3, 4, 5. I have a list going in front of me. So Jack is the founder of Essentia Mattresses. I actually met him so long ago because he's here in South Florida and he had a showroom in South Florida. So I was introduced to him, and his mattress is what you'd call a very premium mattress. But in this episode, we talked all about sleep. We talked about the importance of sleep, quality of sleep. We talked about temperatures during sleep. He talked about, of course, light and dark, noises and sounds all affect our sleep. But the thing that landed the most with me was create a 10-foot, what did he call it? A 10-foot bubble. Build a 10-foot bubble around your bed, preventing any technology, EMF, cellular frequencies, all this stuff that's typically coming around us. Build a tech bubble around your bed. And so I really took that to heart because oftentimes, and I've already taught sleep for many years from the Ayurvedic and circadian perspective. So I already teach, like, make your room dark, make your house cold, have cooling sheets. If you can't have the room completely dark, wear an eye mask, really go for silence. In my case, I can hear my sprinklers go off in the morning. So a lot of times I'm like, can we just move our sprinkler time back so that doesn't wake us up in the morning? But it was interesting, the technology piece, because I had my cell phone charging about 6 to 8 feet away from me. So every night I'd finish with my phone, but I would go charge it like in the closet so it wasn't close to me. Thanks to this episode, I moved my phone to my bathroom. So I get up at night when I'm done with everything, I leave it in the bathroom on the counter, and I don't bring it into my bedroom. So I now have 15 feet almost between me and my phone. I also unplug the Wi-Fi router upstairs. I'm like, that thing doesn't need to be on. If I'm on camera making video, fine. I need that big Wi-Fi power up here. But if not, no, not doing it, not having all this poison go through my body. And so I just loved that episode because it was such a powerful reminder of, you're sleeping 8 hours a day. That's 1/3 of your day. Can you just gift yourself for 1/3 of the day? No crap affecting you. And I know doctors and so many people have to have their phones next to their head. But the rest of us, if you are not on call, keep some distance with your phone. And so it's just really, really a cool episode. I took that message to heart and applied it. So that's why he made it into my top 10. And overall, he's just such a cool guy. His mattress, by the way, is used by mega celebrities, mega athletes. So when we talk about high performance and sleep as a key piece of high performance, as an athlete or as whatever you do in your life for big impact, he and that mattress are very utilized by like national hockey teams and things like that. So it was a really fun episode. So his was episode number 27, early on in the 100 episodes. Next up, I'm going to mention episode number 88 with Dr. Jockers. So Dr. Jockers is someone who I've followed for a long time now. He has been teaching health for about 20 years, and he's been talking about longevity, fasting, ketosis, all these different topics. I got to be on his inflammation summit that's coming out again this year. And I just loved learning from him because it's like one of your mentors. Like you don't meet, but I see these people online. I consume so much of their content. I learned so much. And then to meet them face to face on camera as a whole, it's such a beautiful moment. It's like I'm in such deep gratitude that even happens to me. So to learn from Dr. Jockers in person about ketosis and fasting fitness was really interesting. It was towards the end of the episode, but he talked about fasting. And he said, look, fasting is a fitness. You build the strength with it. You bring the strength, you build the ability to do your fasting over time. And we don't have to do it every day. And it doesn't have to be perfect. And I thought, gosh, thank you. So many people around me say, I can't fast. And I know as women, we have to really cycle through how we're doing our fasting. And so he said, look, at a minimum, we should all have a 12-hour fast. And I was like, I agree. Ayurveda says 12 hours, 7 to 7 or 8 to 8, whatever that is for you. At a minimum, fast 12 hours. And that could or should be every day, in my opinion, should. Then he talked about how you can do crescendo fasting. You can do different types of fasting where you expand and shrink that window. But it's so important to do so. It's important to put the body into ketosis. It's important to let the body heal. It's important to not be on a roller coaster with our insulin releases and have all this issues around blood glucose levels and how that impacts the body. And so it just gave me the confidence that if ketosis, which falling into ketosis for me as a vegetarian is like a whole separate thought process, if you think of it as fitness, then it's really just about building the muscle. And it could be like, okay, well, every day I hold a 12-hour fast. And on my non-lift days, I'm going to try to hold a 16-hour fast. And how do I do that on those days? And if some weeks it's not working, okay, that's just the week where in my 4 weeks of the month, I'm not going to do it. But the following week, I can come back on. So it was such a beautiful way to say, don't not do it because you think it's too hard. Instead, find your way with it. And so I just really loved that message from Dr. Jockers. I was like, wow, you're incredible. So I love his content online. I recommend visiting his website. He has probably 1 million blog posts on his website around health. Off to number 6. 6, 7? I think 6. No, let's see here. 1, 2, 3. Maybe I'm giving you my top 11, guys. Let's see here. No, that's fine. I've numbered it funny. My next favorite podcast episode, Udo Erasmus. So he was on my podcast, episode number 90. His team reached out to me to have him on my podcast. He is such a fun guest. He was like, look, oils are processed in this horrible way. He explained the level of inflammation and toxins in seed oils and made such a powerful argument for never ever touching a seed oil in your life. To the point that whenever I go to a restaurant now, I'm like, oh my God, my kids want to eat out. I don't want the seed oil burden. I think I'll just eat at home before we go. That is how effective his explanation of seed oils was. That every single time I'm about to take a bite, not in my house, I'm like, is it worth it? How many times this week would you like to throw poison into your system before it has such a negative impact? So imagine that's how effective that episode is. So Udo Erasmus also talked about how there are good oils and there are bad oils. So he made a big argument for flax oil because it's so pro omega-3. And so many of us have this omega-6, omega-9 imbalance. So he has an oil actually called omega-369 that's in the right proportion for those oils to come into balance. And I said, I am vegetarian. I don't eat fish. I know I'm severely omega-3 deficient. I've done lipid panels on myself and seen it. And he's like, well, if you take just flax oil, you'll push the omega-3 up, but then it's also important to still give the proportion. I said, okay, fine. And so I really loved his episode for how educational it was about oils. He wrote a book in the past called Fats That Heal and Fats That Kill. I believe that's the name of it. And so he was really the original father of teaching that idea that what we're eating as fats is so important for our health, for our body, for ketosis, for all these ideas. So I really loved his episode. He also said that if a fat is not solid at room temperature, it's not a good oil for cooking. And so that was a really powerful statement because in my house, I was using avocado oil because I was like, well, avocado oil has a high smoke point, so, it's good. And it's interesting because Dr. Jockers made a point on his episode with me that he said, yes, avocado oil has a high smoke point, but you also need to look at its oxidation point. And so olive oil actually has a high oxidation point, which is why olive oil is actually just fine to cook with. But cooking with solid oils could be better. So it's just an interesting conversation to learn about because there are certain things we do every single day. And if you do something every single day, its impact is really going to add up. And so I really think about it and I'm like, well, what are the simple things I can change that affect a daily basis, cumulative effect on our health, especially for my household. I'm in charge of the household and the household's food. So I changed the oils we use when we cook. I stopped buying olive oil from Costco. I stopped buying avocado oil. I bought a huge thing of coconut oil. I'm very lucky that my mom makes bottles and bottles of ghee, puts them in glass jars, and brings them here for me. My husband laughs. He's like, you're 20 years married and your mom still does these things for you. And I'm like, this is how my mom shows her love. If she helps me and my kids be healthy, just let me have it. So yeah, I receive amazing, healthy ghee made with love that is now the foundation of our cooking, or we use grass-fed butter. And that's it. That's the new law in the Gupta house. Coconut oil, ghee, or butter. And we're a little afraid of changing the flavors. So I usually don't use the coconut oil because I'm like, I don't want you to make my food taste sweet or weird. But that was such an enlightening episode because that created a trajectory change on cooking in my house forever. So I do keep some olive oil around because sometimes I'm like, I just want to cook whatever. I want to cook dal and I just don't want to melt butter. So I drop oil in the pan for speed. But for the most part, I would say 95% of the time now we're just dropping butter in the pan. We're not using oil. And so that was a huge, huge, huge shift. Rarely do I make such big grand shifts right now because for the most part, I think I'm pretty dialed in. on a detox healthy life. And so for a podcast guest to come in and change something that much was pretty significant. So I put him into my top 10 because he really did change the oil that we used to cook every day. And then I also ran out that day to Sprouts, bought his flax oil by the company called Flora, and started eating it. So I'd take a teaspoon alongside like lunch, for example, if I'm working from home, and I'll eat it with the food, or I'll put it right on the food and eat it. And I ate that raw, obviously. So Udo Erasmus, someone who I've followed for a long time, was really fun to talk to. And so that was that. That was episode number 6 out of my favorites. Again, I think I numbered this. So funny. And then next episode, that was my absolute favorite, Danny Williamson. Episode number 34. So I was at a conference by Microbiome Labs. They have an annual conference for their healthcare practitioners, and I am now a practitioner of theirs, which is so cool. And I do recommend their probiotic a lot. So if you want my link, email me. I'll give it to you. And Danny Williamson was introduced to me. Someone was like, you don't know Danny Williamson? You have to meet her. So they took me over to her. I met her. She has an amazing book. Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the name. I think it's called Wild Well Woman. I think so. But you can look her up. Danny Williamson's amazing. So Danny Williamson is like a force of nature. She's got this big red hair. She's a no BS woman. She's just got so much energy. I love her. And so she focuses on thyroid health, women's health, hormone health, all these things. She has her practice in Franklin, Tennessee. She's really into supplements and understanding who's the best. I've run into her at conferences where she's like, I'm placing my Quicksilver order. How's it going? And I'm like, hi. And she's trying to figure out what she's going to recommend to her patients and why and all that. So Danny Williamson talked about, of course, her protocol and pillars of health. She's like, eat well, poop well, move well, stress less. I can't remember what the stress one was, and commune well. And she's just got such a beautiful philosophy around health. And so her book is a favorite of many of the people who listened to that episode. And there was one concept that she came up with that I wrote down to share with you guys. She said, when it comes to stress, a lot of times we as women are taking on too much. And we're saying yes to everyone. We don't have enough boundaries, and all that stress is affecting our health. And she said up to 75% of healthcare visits can be tied to stress and its impact on the body. And I thought, wow, mic drop moment, Danny. And so when it comes to stress, she said, I teach my women to AED it. Automate, eliminate, delegate. Just like an automatic external defibrillator, that when someone has like a heart attack, they use it on them to recharge them and get them back to life. She's like, in the same way, AED your life, automate what you can, eliminate everything else, and then delegate whatever's left. And I was like, wow, what a concise and clear way to say, stop signing up for a million things. Stop dying under the weight of all the shit you say yes to. Really learn and look around and take a look at what your life is and what you actually want to do with it. You cannot serve from an empty vessel. And so I just loved that message from her because she's such like a no BS woman. And in my life, I'm a mom, I'm a business owner. I do a lot of different things, wear a lot of hats, but as my company has grown in these last 2-3 years, I've really had to take a hard look at what I say yes and no to. And I have a much bigger filter in place for that. It has to be awesome. It has to be fantastic. Or no, I'm not leaving my house, kids, or my beautiful, healthy life for that thing. And I have to be careful because shiny apple syndrome hits and I'm like, I should go. And then when I hate it, or I'm like, that's not the right thing, or I'm tired, or this was too much. I'm like, okay, where are you going to adjust? Where are you going to change your behavior? And so AED your life, I've automated a lot in my business. I've automated a lot for my home. I've eliminated a lot of old habits, maybe even like I used to say yes to go to everything in South Florida. And now I'm like, no, 90% no. I have to really crave connection and things to go to new things. How about instead I fill up my calendar with things that excite me as opposed to obligations? And then delegate. really delegating and saying, you know what, I don't need to do all those things. Who can help me with this? And that's reduced a lot of stress. Not that there's no stress, there's definitely a lot, but how do we reduce it so that that stress isn't impacting us? To me, I think of stress as a mental inflammation. And in my book coming out next year, that's a whole chapter, an entire chapter on this topic. So I take stress very seriously, and I look at my life as yin and yang, and I look at it as pressure and decompression. And so certain days of the week are workout, lift, get to work, work hard, pick up kids, boom. That's a lot on the system. So what's the yang? If there's a yin and a yang, where's the decompression? It's circadian walking, tea time is me time. I have so many different tools in the toolkit, detoxification from Ayurveda, self-care from Ayurveda. So if you watch me on my Instagram, my behind the scenes of my life is basically all that good stuff that I do outside of the work and the responsibilities. And so her message of automate, eliminate, delegate was really like breathe life back into you by simplifying things. Fill your cup, you come first, which is a big message that I have. But sometimes you need your own colleague to say it to your own face for you to be like, you are right, Danny Williamson. I'm going to make some more changes and simplify things. So I loved her episode. She's just awesome. She's like, menopause is a privilege. You get to live through menopause. Stop complaining. Let's find a way through that's healthy and wholesome for you. And I was like, okay. It's a very different perspective from her, which I loved. So she was my episode number 8 out of my favorite episodes on the podcast. Episode number 9 of my top 10 was episode 31 and the guest was Paula Agudelo. And our topic was sacred design and sacred spaces. So if you check out this episode, Paula is local here in South Florida. I saw a video of her in a Facebook group that a friend had put me into or tagged me in. And as I watched the video, I was like, she will be my friend. I am going to stalk this woman until she is my friend, which is rare. I can say that about less than 10 women on the planet. Some of them are actually here. Danny Williamson's one. I wish I could be Danny Williamson's neighbor. Amy Hornemann. I send voice memos back and forth with her now, and I just really love that woman. I want to be her neighbor and hang out with her more and have even more friendship and time with her, but we're all busy doing our things. So Paula is an incredible soul. She's such a spiritual powerhouse, beautiful woman. And she came onto the podcast and talked about how our sacred space, our home, and the energy that we put into that field and to little spaces and little vignettes in our home can be so nourishing to us. Like that is a piece of self-care. And so I have been following her for a long time. I love her work. When it was time to decorate my daughter's room, I called her and I was like, Anya wants a room, and her theme is tarot and moon and stars and fantasy in the sense of Harry Potter and Percy Jackson. And I was like, I don't know how to accomplish this goal. This is hard. And I don't want to fight with my kid. Everything she wants is cheesy and ugly. And in my house, which I hope to one day fully decorate, her room will be the first with a decorator, but I want it to be beautiful. And so Paula actually has different programs. And one of them on the more affordable package was she'll design your whole room for you. She will feng shui that room for you. And she'll give you everything and you buy it and execute it. And so I did that. And gosh, is she talented, man. From like the light switch having moon and stars, to the curtain holders having moon and stars, to the stickers on the wall in the right corner of her room from feng shui to bring the energy of the stars in based on her future dreams. I was like, wow, this woman is just incredible. So Paula and I chatted about a lot of things on the podcast, but one thing we talked about was when you create sacred spaces in your home, they can be such an intentional creation towards your manifestations that you want. And so I am right now sitting in my home office in South Florida, and this bookshelf behind me was designed by Paula. And so I had called her up and said, Paula, I am having the most incredible moment of my life. Everything's working. I have this podcast that I get to keep doing because it's great and people are listening and we love doing this podcast and then sharing all the bits of it on my Instagram. I really want this bookshelf that feels like the future that I'm calling in. I'm calling in that Dr. Shivani Gupta gets to impact millions of lives, that she writes books that impact lives, that she gets to speak on these grand stages. By that time, I had probably been on 50 podcasts as a guest. So I was like, I want this bookshelf where everyone who has me on their podcast is like, dang, her entire bookshelf reflects like this Indian woman who's into the deliciousness of India and the like magic of Ayurveda and the super spices and the turmeric. And it has all my brand colors and magic in it and has so many crystals and it helps me manifest getting onto the biggest podcast. She was like, okay. She knows me. So she showed up to my house with all this stuff. Half of it I owned and half of it was from Home Goods. All the crystals are mine, but there are key pieces. Like there's this gold vase here. There's these beautiful other vases here. Certain pieces like that vase she brought and frames that were like yellow that fit my Fusionary and Shivani brand colors. So she brought it all together. And what I hadn't realized was the whole bottom of this bookshelf is full of books, which it should, right? It's a bookshelf. But it was all full of pregnancy books. And so when she asked me, like, what are your top books to actually display where people will see the titles? I was like, oh, I don't have many. I listen to audiobooks and I don't know. Basically, it was stuffed with pregnancy books. And I had written a book on pregnancy in my Ayurvedic master's degree time. I was obsessed with pregnancy. Anyways, I sat there and pulled 50 books out of the shelf, gave them away, only kept all the ones on health and wellness that I loved. And it was such a deliberate choice of like, what are we calling in and what past selves are we letting go of? And since then, since we built the bookshelf, months later, I got a call from Hay House saying, we want you to be a Hay House author. I was like, what? All my guides and angels and my fathers in heaven gave that one to me. Holy goodness. That was like dream moment. Then since the starting of this podcast, I have been a guest on 150 podcasts, many of which are dream podcasts for me as well. I was on Dr. Josh Axe's podcast. I was on the Root Cause podcast by Rupa Health. I mean, so many great podcasts. And what I told Paula is it's the intentions we put into the bookcase. I'm sitting in front of like, I don't know, 50 pounds in crystals here. And it all has worked so beautifully. And oftentimes in my spiritual practice, I was born into a Hindu family. And we learned a lot about Zen Buddhism philosophies because those are a part of Hinduism. And I always desire what I desire. And then I always know that I'm going to leave it in God's hands and surrender and just hope for it, but not ever sit there and tie my happiness to it. And so the conversation with Paula was very much a spiritual conversation around like the totems and the magical pieces we place in our lives throughout our home can have this reverberation effect on our lives and they're mental reminders of who we are and what we're calling in. Like I have certain crystals by my bed. I have a very intentional Buddha statue and candles and crystal in the center of the home. I have a Buddha statue with crystals in the front of my home. He's my guardian. We talk. I'm like, guard my house, protect my children. So I'm very much about home being a epicenter, protective space, but also a place where I get to call in my magic. So I loved that episode and I'm so partial, but it was one of my favorite episodes. Next up, episode number 10. So I had an episode with an amazing practitioner who I was introduced to. It's episode number 39 on the podcast, Doc Rock. And Doc Rock is local here in South Florida. I think what was so special about that episode was he had me on his podcast at the podcasting studio, and right afterwards, he was on my podcast. So imagine you're getting to have this cool conversation with someone. It spans over 2 hours. You get to know them first. So by the time you have the second episode, you're already in the zone. You're already connected. You're already like having this loving, epic conversation. So in Doc Rock's episode, he shared about how as a chiropractor, he uses a completely different approach. He doesn't do adjustments. Like, he doesn't crack you in any way. There's no cracking of anything. He's using energetics. And so his system that he's using is really there to open up the garden hose that is our spine and help things flow and move again, so that our organs and everything in our body gets the blood flow and oxygen and nutrients it needs. So he did such a beautiful job explaining that. When I re-listened to that episode, I was like, dang, doc, like, you're so good at talking about this and the importance of it. And I shared a lot in that episode too about my life, because I think we had already talked the hour before. So I was like, I worked at Canyon Ranch and I did that. It was just such a fun conversation. And at the end, it got really spiritual, where we talked about, like, well, I told him, well, if the spinal column is what you're describing, which is like this canal of flow of energy, what about in the spiritual sense? It's Sushumna. It's where our Kundalini energy is moving. It's our access to our entire energetic body and our auric field. And he's like, yes, you're right. And I was like, yes. I mean, this is such a powerful reminder that if we have these kinks in the garden hose and we have these lack of flow in the system, and then we're constantly wondering, why is this wrong with me? Why are we not investing in having everything flow beautifully again? And what is the work we're going to do to have that not perfect, but wonderful flow to help our own auric field, our own energy, and then, of course, our own organs getting what they need. So it was just such a cool conversation. He's such a cool practitioner. And I've had people who listen to this podcast from all over the country give me feedback. And they're like, we loved that episode. So that I asked a couple people for their top 10, and he was in their top 10. Another couple, if I have to give honorable mentions, another couple that others have loved were Dr. Meryl Brandwine. She was on my podcast around health. Keshif Khan talked about DNA testing. I can't even remember the rest, but there was a list I was given of, like, these are our favorite episodes. And I was like, well, I have my own other favorite episodes. So it was kind of fun to do this research and see, like, okay, out of this 100 episodes, what are the favorites? So my top 10 was the ones I just told you so far. I really do love every episode. It's hard to pick, but these were ones where I had to quickly think, what was a key phrase or key message or key teaching that someone said where I was like, I'm applying that one now. So that's how I chose my top 10, where a lot of the people on the podcast are such incredible practitioners. I've already talked to them over the years. I've already learned from them and I've already applied what they say. Or I'm still in process with their tool. Like, for example, Meryl Brandwine and I talked about the 3x4 test. And then I had the 3x4 founder on. I love the test. And I mean, I just want to go so much deeper into it and learn about it. And I have actually applied what it teaches. But I don't know. There's different things that I learned from each person on this podcast. And each one has been able to move me in some way towards a healthier body, a healthier self, and a healthier life. And so that's my wish for you today. Listen to these incredible episodes. Listen to all the episodes over time. You can listen to them in your car. You can listen to them while you're working out. You can watch them in full video on YouTube, and there's YouTube Shorts, and they're on my Instagram at Dr.Shivani Gupta. The whole podcast is linked from my website at drshivani.com. And if you have any comments or feedback, comment below on the YouTube video. I would love to hear from you guys. I am the one who replies to those. So I hope you've enjoyed this podcast so far. It's a gift and an honor, and it's not done lightly. It's done with love. And I really hope to keep bringing in the most incredible guests for you and I both to learn from, and who will help give us these key messages that we need to hear at different points in our health journey to help our own lives and the lives of those around us. As I was listening to some of these episodes to prepare for this episode today, the Heather Sandison episode, I was like, I need to send this to my mom. Like, oh my God. She said, she or Dr. Perlmutter, I listened to both today. I think it was Dr. Perlmutter who said, if you are diabetic and have type 2 diabetes, you have a 4-fold risk of Alzheimer's. And I thought, oh my God, that's my entire family. Like, I'm so obsessed with brain health. Why doesn't anyone understand? We have to make these changes. And so this podcast is really a beautiful opportunity to share this wisdom with your family members, your friends, your loved ones. My goal is for functional medicine and Ayurvedic medicine and integrative medicine to be known by all and for everyone to understand we have so many options on the table when it comes to our health. These fusionary practitioners who were some of the first 50 have taught me so much on that. They've taught me there's a lot of creative tools out there for health. I wouldn't call them creative. There's a lot of tools out there for health that we don't realize can help support us on our health journeys. We just haven't been exposed to them. And so that's my job here, is to be an investigator, to ask the questions, to get some answers so that each and every one of us can build the health and the vibrancy that we all deserve. So I hope you enjoyed this episode today, recapping top 10 out of the 100. And I can't wait for the next 100 episodes of amazingness that is to come on this podcast. It's an honor to be your host. It's an honor to get to do this work. It's an honor to meet the incredible practitioners who say yes to being on this podcast. And I hope you enjoy the next 100 as well. Have a beautiful day, everyone.
Thanks for joining me for this episode. Check out our sponsor, Fusionary Formulas, the potent turmeric supplement used by doctors around the U.S. for patients with pain and inflammation. www.fusionaryformulas.com. I'm your host, Dr. Shivani Gupta. For more, visit shivanigupta.com. Subscribe to this podcast in Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Click the follow button or subscribe in any of the apps that you use. That's all I've got for you on the Fusionary Health Podcast this week. You have the power to transform your health and achieve vibrant health starting today.